Hello and welcome back guys to my channel. Today we are starting a new story titled, Romantic IzuxOcha One-Shots from the My Hero Academia Multiverse, written by lyzarien. The link for the story is in the description, so let's begin. Romantic IzuxOcha One-Shots from the My Hero Academia Multiverse My Hero Academia, Vision of the Future. This couldn't be happening to him. He had to stay focused at all costs on his goal of mastering One for All. Izuku placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart, feeling it race wildly, a growing tightness taking over him. The room was shrouded in darkness, with the curtains closed, creating a stifling atmosphere. The weight of his feelings overwhelmed him. Uraraka was his rival, and he couldn't afford to forget that this will always be the same. It was a new day. Izuku gazed at the blue sky from the second floor of UA. As an autumn leaf fell from a nearby tree, following it with his eyes, his gaze ended up on the courtyard. I won't be able to push away in the courtyard. He saw the girls from his class playing volleyball, partially using their quirks. This thing that now lives within me. His attention quickly focused on Uraraka, who was using her quirk, Float, Nana Shimura's quirk, to reach the ball, then increased its speed with a change in velocity. It's a strange feeling floating above the court. Uraraka noticed Izuku watching them from the window. That I hide from you. Uraraka smiled at him and waved. Every time I see you here. Izuku didn't return the wave, stepping away from the window to start cleaning the blackboard, as it was his turn to do so. Where did my pride go? I want to know. Uraraka didn't take it personally that he hadn't waved back and continued happily playing with the others. What have you done to this heart that now is different, and what will happen? Day by day, thinking of you. Izuku kept erasing the board, but after a moment, he froze, lost in thought. I won't be able to ignore that special girl. Another day, he was chatting, sitting in his seat, surrounded by his classmates. Watching her in silence from here. Through a gap between them, he glanced in Uraraka's direction. She seemed excited about something Tsuyu was telling her, given the wide smile on her face. Feeling something unusual, he watched her for just a second more before resuming the conversation with the guys around him. Inside me, something that won't wait another minute. Another day, as he left the classroom, he found Uraraka leaning against the wall, lost in thought. She didn't even notice him as he passed by. A strange sensation, truly mysterious. Another day, she was serious, or maybe sad, sitting alone in the courtyard with her arms resting on her knees, as if seeking an answer to something, while her hair blew in the wind. My heart beats faster every time I see her. Izuku's green eyes couldn't look away from her. And each day, it grows stronger, but I'll succeed. I know I will. Izuku squeezed the strap of his backpack. And I won't lose against that person in the end. He turned his back on her and walked in the opposite direction. Chasing orange clouds. On this journey another day, during training, Izuku was using his black whip to demonstrate how much he had improved after spending all winter break at Endeavor's agency. Or across the blue sky. All Might seemed very impressed by his demonstration. Imagining 1,000 things, Izuku accepted All Might's praise with a serious attitude, continuing to walk and simply passing him by. But no answer I find to my question. Now, as a spectator with a notebook in hand, Izuku watched Uraraka's demonstration for the whole class. Why are you now someone special to me? Izuku was surprised to notice that the cables on Uraraka's costume were a clear reference to his black whip. I want to know why it makes me. Izuku's hand clenched the pen so hard it almost broke. Feel this sensation. Uraraka was jumping on the screen. Floating without reason. She used the cable from her suit to gather the robots and made them float as she passed them. Being always close to you. Uraraka released her power, and the robots were destroyed as they crashed down. I won't be able to ignore that special girl. Afterwards, Uraraka scratched the back of her neck, downplaying a compliment she seemed to have received from Ishido. Her lovely eyes I can never truly gaze upon. The two were startled when a robotic hand emerged from the debris and aimed at them. Izuku felt a chill run down his spine because I found something that makes me tremble. On the other side, Tsuyu appeared and quickly attacked with her tongue. Then Mina and Uraraka started laughing, while Deku sighed in relief, holding his chest. And it won't let me speak a word. Izuku kept watching the screen attentively as they laughed, until Aizawa-sensei arrived to call their attention. A strange sensation, truly mysterious. Next to Izuku, Bakugo arrived and started yelling something about the demonstration he had just done. Something makes my heart beat faster. On the other side, Todoroki arrived to contradict whatever Bakugo was saying. But I'll have an idea, so that out of the corner of his eye, in the middle of his friend's argument, Izuku discreetly glanced again at the screen, which showed Uraraka's serious face breaking into a soft smile as Aizawa-sensei turned away. So I can control it myself. The screen turned off. I won't lose against anyone. A genuine smile appeared on Izuku's face, and from afar, All Might watched him, smiling too. 1 year earlier Izuku swung nimbly from one building to another, using his black whips to move through the city. Each time he extended his hand, the WHP unraveled with precision, latching onto a ledge or nearby post. The night breeze tousled his hair slightly as his green eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any signs of movement. In his right ear, a high-end communication device glowed faintly under the streetlights, a constant reminder of the mission he was engaged in. I'm sorry for losing sight of All Might, Sir Nighteye, said Izuku, his voice transmitting clearly through the earpiece. I got distracted by a lost child on the street. I stayed with him until we found his mother. Nighteye's response was immediate, his tone stern but not entirely disapproving. No need to apologize, Midoriya. Though I would have preferred you left it to another hero. Many are patrolling at this hour, and it's likely one of them would have found the boy soon enough. Remember, your mission is of great importance too. Izuku nodded, even though he knew Nighteye couldn't see him. You're right. I'll think more carefully next time, sir. Good. Now head southwest. You know All Might tends to grab snacks from convenience stores at this hour, Izuku quickly finished. Nighteye's voice tensed, a mix of irritation and exasperation. How many times do I have to tell you not to interrupt me when I'm speaking? We're not playing trivia. And if we were, you know I'd crush you. No one knows more about All Might than I do. Yes. Sorry. Izuku apologized again, his voice rising to a slightly higher pitch from embarrassment. And stop talking like that. If you really think you're going to become All Might's successor, you need to be a symbol of masculinity and charisma, not childishness. Izuku sighed, disappointment weighing on him. You're right, but in his mind, the image of All Might appeared clearly, an imposing figure, his broad and firm back glowing with a golden light, unreachable despite all the efforts Izuku had made to catch up to him. But every time I think about it, I wonder if I'm really the best choice to become his successor, Izuku admitted, doubt palpable in his voice. So far, All Might hasn't shown much interest in seeing me demonstrate control over my quirks. That, I'm afraid, said Nighteye in a calmer tone, is because of me and our broken relationship in the past. When I tried to convince him to retire to avoid a terrible future, he resisted, arguing that he couldn't leave the world without a new symbol of peace to give people hope. On the other hand, he knows you're my protégé, and that I've nurtured you with the express intention of becoming his successor. Maybe he thinks that after receiving his power, I'll continue to influence you. And though he's not entirely wrong, I'm absolutely certain you're the best option, both because of your powers and your quick, analytical mind. Thank you, sir, but Izuku hesitated for a moment, his thoughts turning to the information he had gathered. Through his butler, I found out that before considering me, you had another boy in mind who is now a UA student named Mirio Togata. I researched him, and he certainly has a lot more charisma than I do, though I think I could easily beat him if I used all my power from the start. Don't be so presumptuous. Nighteye replied firmly. Just because you have 4 quirks and great control over them doesn't make you invincible. Mirio Togata has much more experience than you, and he's still a solid alternative to inherit what's left of One for All. And if All Might ends up choosing him, at least we'll know we lost to the second best option. But if you're wondering why I bet on you instead of him, it's because, in every aspect, one for all must be a complete power, not a fragmented one. Complete. Izuku frowned, trying to understand the implications of that word. Yes, Nighteye continued as Izuku kept swinging between buildings. As you know, in that great battle All Might had against All for One 4 years ago, All for One tried to steal his power, and for some strange reason, One for All split into 2 parts, along with the respective consciousnesses of the previous holders. Izuku's expression grew serious as he recalled those events. It was that night when All for One killed my mother while trying to protect me and kidnapped me with the intention of using my body as a temporary vessel. That's right, Nighteye nodded gravely. Because you were born without a quirk, All for One thought you would be the perfect vessel to temporarily store One for All, and with the help of Dr. Kyudai Garaki, they intended to suppress the wills of the former holders and seize only the power. Although in the end, the transfer was only halfway successful, and All Might emerged victorious, defeating All for One once and for all. The One for All that All Might still possesses holds the consciousness of 3 former users, doesn't it? Izuku asked, making sure he understood correctly. That's right, Nighteye confirmed, and I firmly believe that all 7 of them must remain together to continue cultivating their power and achieve the greatness that has inspired us all. One for All must remain a complete power passed down from generation to generation to maintain peace in the world and give hope. Izuku nodded with renewed determination. I see. So that's what you mean by a complete power. Exactly. And if we want to take advantage of an opportunity to get All Might's attention and convince him that this is the right way to proceed, it's now or never, before he starts teaching at UA. Otherwise, you'll be at a clear disadvantage as a first-year student and Togata as a third-year. Izuku took a deep breath. Understood, and I'm with you, he said finally, his voice firm and resolute. Good. Now, continue your search. Remember, Midoriya, this is your chance to prove you're worthy of One for All. Don't waste it. Izuku quickened his pace, his movements more decisive and precise. With each leap and each flick of his whips, his confidence grew. He felt the wind on his face, his heart racing, and the certainty that he was one step closer to his destiny. He eventually stopped on the roof of a building, observing the convenience store below. The lights shone, casting a soft glow on the empty sidewalk. The long-range visor he held up to his eyes allowed him to get a clearer view of the store's entrance. As he remained in position, his green eyes scanned every movement. He saw a tall man, with the same build as All Might, approaching the store. From a distance, he seemed to fit the description: messy blonde hair, a flashy jacket, and that unmistakable walk. But when the man turned to open the door, Izuku noticed his face was entirely different. It's not him, he muttered to himself, feeling a small sting of disappointment. Suddenly, a voice echoed behind him, deep and familiar. Hey, were you looking for me? Izuku spun around sharply, his heart skipping a beat. Ah! All Might, sir! He exclaimed, instinctively stepping back. There stood All Might, only a few meters away, watching him with a friendly smile. You can just call me All Might, no need for the sir, said All Might in a jovial tone as he slowly approached Izuku. I noticed right away that someone was following me and was expecting some sort of surprise attack, but when that didn't happen, I started thinking it might be something else. He paused, looking at him curiously. Though I certainly didn't expect to run into Sir Nighteye's protégé today. You were just talking to him, weren't you? Mind if I speak to him for a moment? Just want to say hello. Izuku froze for a second, surprised by the request. His mind raced, wondering if he should or shouldn't do it. Yes, but do it. Nighteye's voice came through the earpiece, firm and authoritative, breaking Izuku's hesitation. With a slight nod, Izuku handed the earpiece to All Might, who took it with a warm smile that quickly shifted into a serious expression as he heard the voice of his former comrade. Hi, All Might. Hi, All Might began softly, but his tone suddenly shifted to one of frustration and anger. What the hell do you think you're doing? You're still filling this poor kid's head with grand ideas when he's already been through enough. Just to turn him into a carbon copy of me and pass on this burden. You've gone too far with this. Izuku felt the tension in the air, his eyes darting between All Might and the earpiece, unsure if he should intervene. Sir, if I may, he started timidly. Sir Nighteye only has the best intentions and cares deeply about you. Ugh, that's the most dangerous part. All Might grumbled, handing the earpiece back to Izuku with a frustrated gesture. He always thinks he's doing the right thing and that he's the only one who knows best, but my opinion matters too. Of course, All Might, Sir. Izuku agreed, still feeling the weight of the situation. All Might looked him over from head to toe, his sharp blue eyes taking in every detail of the young hero in training. You're pretty young to be out here using your powers like this. Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine. Yes, sir, but thanks to Sir Nighteye having his own agency, he was able to get me a provisional hero license with certain restrictions. Though, I had to go through quite a few tests in the registry. All Might nodded, his expression softening. So, you're not a student at a hero school yet, but you already have a provisional license. That's pretty unprecedented and quite impressive. Izuku bowed deeply in front of him, respect and admiration shining in his eyes. Thank you so much for saying that. It's a great honor to be recognized by someone with such an outstanding career. All Might couldn't help but chuckle a bit. You're a bit of a fan of mine, aren't you? Izuku nodded enthusiastically. Of course, I am. All Might smiled even wider. Now I see why you get along so well with my old friend, he said with a soft laugh. That's right, sir. After all, he was the one who kindly took me in after I lost my mother. All Might's smile faded slightly, and he stepped forward, moving closer to Izuku. I'll never stop apologizing for not getting there in time to save her. Izuku shook his head vigorously, his eyes full of determination. On the contrary. I'm eternally grateful to you for rescuing me from All for One's hands. As for my mother, I've come to understand that no matter how great a hero is, even the best can't be in more than one place at the same time. That's why having a symbol of peace is so important to inspire other heroes to act when they doubt going further. All Might patted him on the shoulder with an approving smile. I couldn't have said it better myself. Sounds like you're aiming to join UA's hero course. My alma mater. Izuku nodded eagerly. Yes, sir. I can't imagine studying anywhere else. All Might paused to look at Izuku more closely, noticing something in his expression. There was a seriousness on his face, an intense focus, but he hadn't seen him smile once. You know, All Might began in a thoughtful tone, I'm starting to think that if you. Izuku's eyes widened, feeling excitement rising within him. His heart pounded, and for a moment, it felt like the ground beneath him was shifting. But a second later, a sharp pain hit his head, and he snapped to attention, realizing that the ground was indeed shaking. A strong vibration rippled through the building, shaking everything around them. It's an earthquake. Izuku shouted, trying to keep his balance. All Might reacted quickly, reaching out to steady Izuku. Stay alert. He yelled, scanning the area to assess the situation. The ground shook violently, and the windows rattled dangerously. The building trembled, and debris began to fall from the nearby ceilings. We have to get down and make sure everyone's safe. Izuku said with determination, his mind quickly switching to hero mode. All Might nodded. Agreed. Make sure the nearby buildings are evacuated. Got it. Izuku responded, using his black whip to propel himself to the next building. He moved swiftly and with agility, using FA Gene to rescue people from the falling debris. As All Might quickly descended to the street, his mind was racing. Despite the tension of the moment, he couldn't help but feel a spark of hope as he watched Izuku in action. Maybe if he smiled more, he thought, this young man really could have what it takes to be the next symbol of peace. Though there was also that young woman he had met a few days ago. She reminded him a lot of his mentor, Nana Shimura, in several ways. 2 years later Izuku's door swung open suddenly. Midoriya. Nighteye's firm voice echoed as he entered the room quickly. However, when he looked inside, he found it empty. The room was spotless, every detail meticulously in place. The All Might posters were perfectly aligned, and every action figure was arranged in exact chronological order. Nighteye adjusted his tie, as if that small gesture could hide the embarrassment of his unnecessary and unexpected intrusion. After taking one last look at the almost obsessive order of the room, he closed the door with a sigh. Inside the closet, Izuku, shirtless and with disheveled hair, held Uraraka tightly against his chest. His hand gently covered her mouth, his fingers trembling slightly from the nervousness of the moment. Uraraka, without her blouse, breathed quickly and heavily, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and fear. Izuku kept his face close to hers, fully focused on any sound coming from outside. He didn't dare relax his hold until he was certain the danger had passed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Izuku let out a sigh of relief and lowered his hand. He smiled at Uraraka, his eyes warm and playful. "Sorry about that. I didn't expect him to come home so soon," he whispered, slowly leaning toward her. His lips quickly found the lobe of Uraraka's ear, and he felt her shiver from the soft lick. "Although, I think I've finally mastered the secret to defeating his quirk. He won't be able to control me anymore." Izuku Uraraka murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Ichem." Izuku was now focused on holding her, his hands running along the bare skin of her back, brushing against the clasp of her BR, and burying his nose in her soft hair. "Wouldn't it be better if we just told Sir Nighteye what's going on between us and stopped hiding?" she asked, her eyes searching his with genuine concern. "It's not that easy," Izuku replied softly, his lips grazing her neck between each short sentence. "He still thinks I should defeat you and convince you to give me the quirks you received from All Might to complete one for all once and for all and become the true successor of All Might. And you don't want that anymore." Uraraka's voice trembled slightly as her body tensed with each kiss Izuku placed on her neck, slowly making his way down to her jawline. "No," Izuku answered gently, with an intensity that made Uraraka's heart race faster. "The only thing I want now is in a swift motion." Izuku opened the closet door and, lifting Uraraka, wrapped her legs around his waist as he gently carried her toward the bed. He laid her carefully on the sheets, looking into her eyes for several seconds. He sighed, feeling the moment charged with a sweet, aching tension. Uraraka was completely flushed, her skirt slightly raised, revealing the soft skin of her thighs. Izuku swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "Uraraka," suddenly, the door to Izuku's room burst open again. Izuku immediately used his smoke screen quirk, though all he could do afterward was tilt his head in resignation as they were caught in the act. Nighteye gave them time to finish getting dressed, leaning his back against the wall outside the room. "So, you thought you were cleverer than me," Midoriya Nighteye said, arms crossed, his expression calm and unreadable. "But this just proves that the only one who ever managed to beat my foresight was the great All Might, and no one else." Uraraka slipped out of the room with a slight bow as she passed Sir Nighteye, her presence quickly fading down the hallway as she left the house. Izuku, finishing the last button on the sleeve of his impeccably white shirt, stood in the doorway, looking at Nighteye with a mix of defiance and resignation. "Why didn't you tell me, Midoriya?" Nighteye asked, turning slowly toward him. There was a note of disappointment in his voice. "I hate having to find out through my quirk. Because you've been telling me for 2 years that she's my rival and that I need to defeat her," Izuku admitted, a hint of resentment in his voice. "And that it's wrong to fraternize with the competition." "That's true, I said that when I thought you were going soft, and that's why you weren't defeating her decisively," Nighteye explained, his voice now more thoughtful. "But if you've fallen for her, I won't stand in your way." "You won't?" Izuku asked, surprised by the sudden understanding in Nighteye's tone. "No. In fact, it might be the most acceptable resolution given the circumstances." Nighteye began walking down the hallway towards his study, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. "Sooner or later, and it seems more sooner than later, the two of you will have children, and maybe one of them will inherit all of One for All's original quirks. Then, perhaps, we'll finally have the true successor to All Might. Though you should probably wait until you're at least of age, Midoriya. Izuku smiled faintly, his surprise giving way to a slight embarrassment. The thought of such an unexpected future settled in his mind, but for now, he couldn't help but feel grateful that the battle against his rival for One for All could finally be set aside. Romantic IzuxOcha one-shots from the My Hero Academia multiverse. The arrest scene unfolded under an orange sunset sky, with the evening slowly settling over the city. In the background, police sirens echoed as the criminals were still being guarded by Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki, their hands secured behind their backs. Among the crowd watching from a distance, a reporter with a lively expression and her cameraman filmed the conclusion of the operation. The young journalist, microphone in hand and a professional smile on her face, addressed the camera. Once again, 3 outstanding students from U.A.'s Hero Course have prevented a bank's armored car robbery, she announced enthusiastically. Then, gesturing for her cameraman to follow. Let's try to get closer and see if we can get a few words from these up-and-coming heroes. With quick steps and the microphone raised, the reporter made her way toward the heroes. However, she was abruptly halted by an explosive shout. Hey! Don't get so close. Are you trying to die? Bakugo roared, his rough voice echoing with impatience. The reporter stepped back, visibly nervous, stammering as she spoke. Sorry, Dynamite. She apologized, her voice shaking as she took a few steps away. Deku, who was firmly adjusting the bindings on one of the criminals with his black whips, looked up quickly, a mix of concern and disapproval on his face. Kaken, remember what Mr. Aizawa always tells you about being more polite to civilians and the press, he said with a tense smile, though his tone was friendly. Bakugo responded with a low growl, avoiding Deku's gaze, clearly unwilling to soften his attitude. Although he does have a point, Shoto added calmly but firmly. It'd be better if you waited a bit before approaching. The reporter nodded quickly, still a bit nervous but maintaining her professionalism. Second take. At that moment, the cameras captured the police escorting the handcuffed criminals into the police vehicles in the background. For now, the situation was under control. Well, I think we all know these 3 by now, the reporter smiled at the camera, regaining her confidence. With graduation just around the corner, it's clear they have a bright future ahead as professional heroes. With renewed energy, the journalist approached Shoto, holding out the microphone with curiosity. We've heard that at school they call you the new Big 3. What do you think about that? Shoto looked at her with his usual expression, cold but curious. Do they? He asked, as if he genuinely wasn't aware of the nickname. Meanwhile, Bakugo turned away, clearly uninterested in this kind of question, while Deku waved enthusiastically at the camera, his hand shaking with a slightly nervous smile. Have you already decided what you'll do after graduating from U.A.? The reporter asked, now turning the microphone toward Deku. Will you continue working at Endeavor's agency, or could this be one of the last times your fans see you together as a team? Deku hesitated, scratching the back of his head with an awkward laugh. We've each received a few offers, but we haven't made a final decision yet, he explained sincerely. Though I highly doubt we have any fans. The reporter gave him a sly smile. Well, you at least have one. Deku blushed furiously at that remark, trying to form some coherent response. Before he could say anything more, the reporter shifted her attention to Bakugo, who stood with his arms crossed and his usual defiant expression. It's well known that all 3 of you admire the retired hero All Might, and it's also common knowledge that you aspire to take his place as the number 1 hero. But who do you think is currently closest to achieving that goal? Bakugo didn't hesitate for a second before responding. It's obvious that I'll be the new number 1 hero, he declared with his trademark arrogance. Because I've always been the best and I have the best skills. That's not fair, Kaken. Deku protested, not backing down. I'm the one who's improved the most this past year. And I'm the student with the highest grades at U.A. Shoto added calmly, which only heightened the tension between the 3. That has nothing to do with real life. Bakugo shot back, clearly annoyed. That doesn't prove anything. At that moment, a voice called out from off-camera. Let's go. We've got another call, Endeavor shouted, his authoritative tone echoing. Finally. Bakugo exclaimed, jumping up immediately, not wasting another second. Shoto turned to the reporter, maintaining his usual politeness. I'm sorry, but we have to leave now. The cameraman stopped recording and lowered the camera. Deku, still a bit flustered from the earlier interaction, was about to follow his friends when he felt a gentle hand lightly tug at his hero suit. The reporter, with a smile that mixed professionalism and a hint of flirtation, discreetly handed him a small pink slip of paper. If you ever want to give me an exclusive interview, feel free to call me, she said, handing him her personal number with a playful wink. Deku hesitated for a few seconds, clearly nervous, but eventually took the slip. Thank you, he mumbled, cheeks flushed, before hurrying after his friends. Later, Izuku stared at the pink slip of paper in his hand, the blush on his cheeks reflecting his discomfort as he remembered the face of the young reporter who had given it to him. For a moment, his mind wandered to the possibility of texting her, but soon, the image of the reporter bombarding him with questions flooded his mind. I wouldn't recommend dating someone from the press, Bakugo advised as he passed by. Both were drinking their own cup of tea in the kitchen. Bakugo looked at him with his usual irritated expression, but with a tone that, to Izuku's surprise, sounded like a serious warning. No matter how you look at it, it's a bad idea, Izuku. Especially for someone like you. Before Izuku could respond, Todoroki silently appeared, taking an interest in the conversation. Why wouldn't it be a good idea? Todoroki asked, sitting down next to them. Midoriya, despite his popularity, hasn't dated anyone since. Izuku quickly interrupted him. Actually, I wasn't planning to, he responded, finally folding the pink slip and tossing it into the nearby trash can. I don't really feel like dating anyone right now. Besides, Kaken might have a point. A reporter could be trying to get information about you, or some case. And everyone knows I'm not the best at keeping secrets when I get nervous. Bakugo leaned back in his chair, calmly sipping his tea. Then he smiled, that familiar mocking grin Izuku knew all too well. Besides, this nerd can't be that popular, he added, glancing at Todoroki. That reporter must have had an agenda. Maybe the thing about the reporter is true, Todoroki admitted, nodding. But according to that poll the girls in our class did, Midoriya is the most popular this year. Izuku nearly choked on his tea, the blush returning to his cheeks in full force. What? Bakugo raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed. I thought the one always being popular with girls would be you, icy hot. Todoroki calmly sipped his tea, unfazed. Apparently, a more cheerful attitude like Midoriya's has become trendy lately, more than serious or tough guys like the two of us. Izuku couldn't help but laugh nervously at the comment. How can you say that without feeling embarrassed at all? Midoriya questioned, surprised at how naturally Todoroki talked about the topic. No idea, Todoroki replied, shrugging. Meanwhile, Bakugo finished his cup of tea and got up to wash it. After a moment of silence, he added, I bet this guy won't even be able to find a date for graduation. Todoroki looked at him curiously. I always thought the three of us would go together. I thought the same, Izuku agreed. What? Bakugo replied incredulously. No way am I spending my last night with you two, after seeing you almost every day for 3 years. Are you seriously thinking of inviting someone other than us, Kaken? Midoriya asked curiously. Who? None of your business, Bakugo refused to answer, crossing his arms firmly. But, since you guys haven't thought about graduation, maybe we can make it more interesting. Todoroki tilted his head slightly, intrigued. Interesting. Like in those American movies where we challenge the most popular guy, in this case, Midoriya, to convince a random girl to go to the graduation party with him and make her the most popular girl in 6 weeks. Bakugo had to stifle a laugh, covering his mouth with one hand. That's way better than what I had in mind. He mocked. But Todoroki. Izuku protested. I already said I don't want to date anyone right now. Too late, loser, Bakugo said, poking Izuku in the chest with his finger. The first girl we see around here will be the one. Before Izuku could reply, Bakugo threw his arm around his shoulder and covered his mouth. The three stood in silence, waiting, but the hallway was completely still. Todoroki, watching the scene with his usual calm, gestured toward the clock on the wall. It might be a bit late already, he murmured, his eyes never leaving the ticking hands. We barely made it back from my father's agency, but most people must already be resting in their rooms. You might be right, icy hot, Bakugo agreed with a slight frown, though his eyes still scanned the hallway, alert for any sign of movement. Taking advantage of the brief distraction, Izuku lowered the hand covering his mouth. Besides, it wouldn't be right to use a girl for a bet. Bakugo frowned for a moment, but then a spark of inspiration flashed in his mind. His lips curled into a cunning smile as he thought for a moment. Not even for he paused for effect, savoring the suspense. An original All Might figure with his armor and his car. The mention of the coveted All Might figure and his iconic Hercules car was enough to make Izuku's eyes light up immediately. His expression completely changed. It was like the hero-obsessed kid he always had been was shining through again. But after a moment, he quickly shook his head, trying to resist. I don't believe you, he replied, narrowing his eyes with suspicion. You don't have that kind of collectible, and that figure is really expensive online. Bakugo let out a sarcastic chuckle, leaning closer to Izuku. Anything to see you make a fool of yourself trying to get a girl for graduation, he mocked, enjoying the little challenge he had planted in Izuku's mind. Unless you're scared. Bakugo's comment sparked something in Izuku. For the first time, a competitive glint flashed in his eyes, but he forced himself to shake his head, trying not to give in to the provocation. I already told you, he couldn't finish the sentence. Bakugo, always one step ahead, covered his mouth again before he could say more. His eyes narrowed, and this time, his expression shifted from teasing to serious concentration. Shut up, he whispered firmly. Someone's coming. The three of them froze, and silence filled the room once more. Suddenly, the soft sound of shuffling footsteps could be heard. Turning towards the entrance to the kitchen, they saw a girl with short brown hair stumbling in their direction, barely awake. Her eyes were half closed from sleep, and her disheveled appearance was almost comical. Her hair was so messy it looked like a small bird's nest, with pillow marks still visible on her neck. She walked like she was on autopilot, heading straight for the fridge. With clumsy movements, she opened the door and pulled out a carton of milk, drinking directly from it as she scratched her armpit, completely unaware of the three boys watching her. Without a word, she closed the door, the carton still in her mouth, and shuffled back down the hallway. Bakugo, barely able to hold it in, raised his other hand to cover his mouth, trying not to burst into laughter. She's perfect, he muttered in a choked voice. Todoroki, on the other hand, stroked his chin thoughtfully. I think she's a second-year student. Her hero name has something to do with her gravity quirk. I think it was Uravity. The mention of the girl's quirk was enough to finally make Bakugo break into a muffled laugh. She even has a dumb quirk, he sneered, unable to contain himself any longer. Izuku, finally freeing himself from Bakugo's hand, took a deep breath and replied firmly, That's not fair, Kaken. There are probably lots of amazing uses for a gravity quirk. Perfect. Looks like you're interested. Then it's settled, Bakugo declared with a sly grin. Izuku quickly stood up, feeling the situation slipping out of his control. He walked over to the sink, washing his cup with quick, nervous movements. I didn't mean I'm accepting the bet, he clarified, his voice steady but with a slight tremor. I don't think this is right, and besides, it's time we go to bed. You're all getting weird ideas because you're tired. Not giving them time to respond, he left the kitchen, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Todoroki watched him go before turning to Bakugo. Do you think, like in the movies, Midoriya will fall for that girl? Todoroki asked with a serious look. But then she'll find out the truth before he can tell her that he actually fell for her, even though it started as a bet, and she'll get mad at him. We'll see. Bakugo brought a hand to his mouth, trying not to laugh again. That night, Izuku found himself staring at the ceiling from his bed, unable to fall asleep. His mind betrayed him, bringing back memories of his time with Melissa during his first year, those days they spent together in America. Then, his thoughts shifted to his second year, when he spent long hours with Mei Hatsum in her workshop. Both had been significant relationships in his life, but the separations had been too painful. Somehow, he still blamed himself for how things had turned out. Izuku turned over in bed, the images of that reporter giving him her phone number and then the girl with messy hair and half-closed eyes fluttering through his mind. He repeated to himself over and over that he wasn't ready, that it wasn't the right time. But despite that, the doubt lingered. Would he ever be able to open his heart again? Romantic IzuxOcha one-shots from the My Hero Academia Multiverse. The bright, warm morning sun filtered softly through the blinds. Izuku, now 24 years old and seated at his desk in the UA Teacher's Lounge, glanced up briefly from the stack of exams he was diligently grading. His desk was positioned next to an open window, allowing the fresh breeze to sweep in and carry with it the distant rustle of leaves from the trees in the courtyard. That sound had always been a source of comfort for him, a simple melody that reminded him of everything he'd fought for in his youth. The pen in his hand paused, his fingers stilling as memories from the past rushed into his mind unbidden. Moments of joy and sorrow intertwined in a vivid tapestry. He thought of the time he had spent with his friends, each memory precious, but his thoughts lingered especially on Uraraka. Now, those moments felt distant, fading with the passing years as they all had grown apart. The gap between them had widened slowly, largely because of his own choices. After losing his powers completely, Izuku had struggled with his confidence, often feeling unsure of how to act around his old friends when they reunited. Lowering his head, Izuku sighed as a bittersweet feeling crept over him. He couldn't help but wonder where Uraraka was now and what she was doing. Then, suddenly, a cheerful, familiar voice called out, breaking through his reverie. Deku. Izuku's head snapped up, and to his utter astonishment, he saw Uraraka hovering outside the window, her eyes sparkling with joy, framed by the golden glow of the morning sun. Uraraka! He exclaimed, jolting so suddenly that his chair nearly toppled over. Before he could fall, though, Uraraka reached out and grabbed his wrist. Careful! She said, her voice laced with soft laughter as she steadied him. The sound of her laugh filled the room, momentarily dispelling the crisp coolness of the morning. Sorry about that. But I guess my plan to surprise you was a success. Izuku quickly regained his balance, his cheeks flushing slightly in embarrassment. Uraraka, it's so good to see you, but... He stammered, managing a nervous smile. What are you doing here? Well, I was in the area and thought I'd drop by to visit my favorite UA teacher. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Izuku shook his head instantly, rising from his chair and reaching out to help her inside. Uraraka took his hand, her warm fingers brushing against his in a way that made his heart skip a beat. Once inside, she deactivated her quirk, touching down lightly on the floor. You should have told me you were coming, Izuku remarked, glancing at the clock on the wall. We could have had lunch together, but I have a class in 5 minutes. Uraraka's eyes sparkled as she smiled. Then how about dinner tonight? Izuku was sitting by the fountain in the shopping mall, the same one where Class 1A had gone shopping together in the past. He had suggested to Uraraka over text that they could make a reservation at a restaurant, but she insisted on something simple, saying she was craving a burger. Looking around at the nearby shops, Izuku wondered if he should have bought a burger for Uraraka before the places started closing. Still, the thought of being stood up and left with the food felt more than a little depressing. Now, he found himself watching the gentle ripples of the fountain's water, illuminated by the lights of the few stores that were still open but already being cleaned for the night. He was still wearing the formal suit he used for teaching at UA, as he initially thought he wouldn't have time to go home and change. He had tried to pass the time by reviewing tomorrow's lesson plans on his phone and window shopping, but the wait was becoming increasingly hard to ignore. Uraraka's call announcing her delay had sounded optimistic, and Izuku had thought it would only be a few minutes. However, now, nearly an hour later, he checked his watch again and stood up. A mix of worry and mild resignation settled in his chest as the idea of leaving began to seem reasonable. That was when he heard the sound of hurried footsteps. Turning, he saw Uraraka running toward him, her cheeks flushed and loose strands of hair floating around her face. She stopped in front of him, bending over as she tried to catch her breath. "I'm so sorry. So sorry." Uraraka panted, trying to steady her breathing. Her eyes shone with a mix of apology and relief as she realized he was still there. "I can't believe how late I am. My phone, the battery died, and I couldn't let you know." Izuku looked at her, noticing the traces of effort in her expression, and the tension that had built up within him melted away. "Don't worry about it," he said softly, trying to ease her guilt with a gentle smile. "Are you okay?" Uraraka nodded, standing up straight and brushing a stray strand of hair away from her forehead. "Yeah, it's just that," she sighed, a small smile forming on her lips. "After I hung up, I came across a lost child on the street. He was so scared, so I stayed with him until we found his mom. Luckily, everything worked out, and I think they even recognized me. Can you believe it?" Izuku felt a familiar warmth in his chest. That was the Uraraka he knew, someone who would always put others before herself, even if it meant being late, inconveniencing herself, or enduring hardships. It was no wonder she had become one of the greatest heroes of their time. "I see. I'm really glad you were able to help him," he said with a smile that felt genuinely heartfelt. Uraraka blushed slightly and glanced around to hide it, noticing that the food stalls were already closed. Her expression shifted into a slight frown. "I'm sorry I didn't buy you the burger you wanted," Izuku apologized, bowing his head slightly. "I wasn't sure which one you'd like. Maybe I should have just bought several for you," although Uraraka narrowed her eyes thoughtfully. "That doesn't matter anymore, but I'm not giving up on my burger idea just yet," she declared, crossing her arms before turning to him with a renewed, wide grin. "I have an idea, but I'll need your help. You're not going to say no, are you?" Izuku's eyes widened slightly in curiosity and surprise. Uraraka stepped closer and, without warning, took his hand. Izuku felt a sudden warmth rush through him, accompanied by a light blush rising to his cheeks. He felt like a teenager all over again and thought it would be embarrassing if any of his students saw him like this right now. Izuku and Uraraka walked out of the supermarket, their hands full of shopping bags, their laughter blending with the sound of their steps in the empty parking lot. One of the bags revealed the neck of a wine bottle sticking out, while another held a box of premium burger patties. Izuku stopped for a moment, a distracted smile lighting up his face as he looked at Uraraka. Noticing his gaze, she turned to him with a smile so genuine it seemed to brighten even the dark night sky. "What is it?" she asked. "And nothing," Izuku replied, shaking his head as a faint blush colored his cheeks. "I was just thinking it's nice to catch up and talk with you while helping you with your shopping." Uraraka gave him a surprised look. "What are you talking about? Don't tell me you think I'm eating all of this by myself." Izuku blinked, caught off guard. "Deku." Uraraka's voice trailed off as a sudden clap of thunder echoed around them, and almost instantly, the rain poured down. "I think I forgot my umbrella," Izuku muttered, rummaging through his bag before quickly trying to shield Uraraka with his jacket. She blushed slightly, feeling the warmth of his effort to protect her. "Me too," she admitted nervously, but almost immediately a light laugh escaped her lips again. Before Izuku could react, he felt Uraraka's hand grab his arm to pull him closer, and the warmth of the accidental touch of his arm against her chest coursed through his skin like lightning, more powerful than the thunder that continued. "This way," she said, guiding him with determination. "My apartment is just over here." The city street seemed empty at that hour. The streetlights cast golden reflections in the puddles, while the raindrops formed countless ripples that spread and intersected. Izuku, with his hair plastered to his forehead and a mix of confusion and nervousness in his chest, allowed himself to be led, acutely. aware of his irregular heartbeat. He couldn't shake the thought that once again, he felt like an inexperienced teenager with his first love. The walk to Uraraka's apartment wasn't long, but every step seemed to carry a different weight in Izuku's mind, which was busy debating what was happening. An unusual feeling stirred in his chest as he tried to steady his ragged breathing, convincing himself it was from the rush to escape the rain, not from the anticipation of something that surely wouldn't happen. Uraraka didn't say much either, but her smile lingered as she occasionally glanced at Izuku out of the corner of her eye. She couldn't help but notice how his flushed cheeks contrasted with the raindrops trailing down his face. Finally, they arrived at the entrance of her building. Uraraka released his arm, handed him the shopping bags, and rummaged through her bag for the keys. Meanwhile, Izuku focused on calming his nerves. As she opened the door and they stepped into the lobby, a dense silence, heavy with unspoken expectations, settled between them. They exchanged nervous smiles, neither quite sure how to act. "Thanks for coming. I mean, welcome. Make yourself at home," Uraraka said, her usual cheerful tone tinged with a slight, endearing timidity. Raindrops trickled down her hair, leaving dark streaks on her blouse. For a brief moment, Izuku found himself captivated by the sight, though he quickly averted his gaze, fighting to maintain his composure and not be so obvious. Thanks for having me," Izuku stammered, his smile shaky as he closed the door behind him. Uraraka handed him a towel, but before he could take it, she stepped closer and began gently drying his hair herself. Their gazes locked inevitably. And, for reasons neither could fully process, Uraraka softly pushed him back against the wall, and he didn't resist. Without breaking eye contact, and before they could second-guess their actions, their lips met in a tentative kiss, barely brushing against one another. It deepened gradually, evolving into something real, as if they were testing the waters of a long-awaited moment. They discovered, in that kiss, everything they had been yearning for over the years. All the unspoken emotions and delayed confessions from their teenage days as awkward and indecisive kids were right there, tangible and undeniable. The apartment soon filled with the sound of their breaths and the friction of their damp clothes as the kiss grew more fervent. Soft noises escaped Uraraka's lips when Izuku moved to kiss her neck, his arms tightening around her to help her slip out of her wet jacket. As their hands explored each other, past memories and suppressed emotions surged to the surface, bursting forth like a pressure valve suddenly released. The trembling of their bodies and the long-awaited closeness wrapped around them entirely. Their lips found each other again, urgent and unrelenting. When Uraraka finally pulled back just enough to catch her breath, their eyes met once more. It was then that she softly asked him a question: "Do you want to take a shower?" She asked sweetly, her voice light but warm, because of the rain. Izuku didn't hesitate. His answer came without breaking her gaze, an unspoken agreement sealed in that very moment. "Of course, I do." Izuku's jacket and Uraraka's coat hung carelessly over the backs of the chairs in the living room, and a trail of abandoned clothes led the eye to the closed door of the bathroom. The sound of water falling was now a constant echo in Uraraka's apartment. A soundtrack that promised both reconciliation and longing in equal measure. What followed in the shower were more kisses, each one feeling desperate to make up for lost time, under the water that seemed to heal and forgive everything. Steam filled the bathroom, wrapping their figures in a haze of warmth. Izuku, with his heart pounding so fast it was almost painful, pressed Uraraka against the tiles with his entire body, holding her legs on either side. The kisses grew deeper, charged with longing, as if every touch was a broken promise they were trying to restore. Water droplets traced paths down their intertwined bodies, making everything seem more ethereal, more intense. Uraraka let out a mm into his mouth, and for Izuku, that was a clear enough warning to pull back, finding himself on the edge as well. Uraraka responded by taking control, quite literally, with a touch so soft that Izuku closed his eyes tightly and clenched his jaw, trying to contain the onslaught of sensations. The steam and the warmth of the water enveloped them, making reality dissolve within that closed space meant only for them. The evening continued in the kitchen, which was now a complete mess. Flour covered the floor, marked with their footprints, and scattered pans bore witness to their enthusiastic dinner preparations. But at that moment, neither of them cared in the slightest. "So your parents live in Hawaii now?" Izuku asked, taking another bite of his burger until he finished it. Uraraka nodded, sipping her wine with a smile. Her empty plate, now reduced to just crumbs, stood as proof of how much she had enjoyed the homemade burgers they had prepared together. "Yeah, I miss them a lot sometimes, but I'm lucky to visit them once a month," she replied, her voice softening with a hint of nostalgia. "How's your mom?" she asked, meeting his gaze with genuine interest. "She's doing well. I visit her whenever I can, and thankfully, she's in good health," he answered, glancing down at his wine glass with a gentle smile that spoke of deep, simple love. "I'm glad to hear that," she replied. Their conversation paused when Izuku, in a gesture that felt almost protective, leaned toward her and wiped a trace of sauce from the corner of her lips with the pad of his finger. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but enough for both of them to hold their breath. Their eyes met again, narrowing slightly as if the moment itself demanded their undivided attention. Izuku slid his hands gently along Uraraka's hips, removing the last piece of clothing that separated them and letting it fall to the side of the bed. The NTMT dimness mingled with the subtle rustle of the sheets. He took a moment to admire her, noticing how her breathing quickened and a blush spread across her cheeks, making her look especially cute. His eyes closed for a second, as if trying to etch that image into his memory forever. Unable to suppress his desires any longer, he leaned down and began tracing her skin with kisses. Descending to taste between her legs, guiding himself by her reactions to STMLT her. Uraraka's hands gripped the sheets tightly, as if seeking an anchor in the sea of sensations that overwhelmed her. Her cheeks flushed deeper as she kept her eyes closed, letting out soft sighs she seemed to try to hold back, though the waves of pleasure coursing through her made it nearly impossible. Izuku, with his heart pounding wildly, continued letting himself be guided by every tremor and ragged breath until he finally brought her to CLMX. He was surprised to feel his own body responding again, having thought he had reached his limit after the intense, steamy shower they had shared earlier. For some reason that Izuku couldn't quite define in that moment, a sharp pain began to rise in his chest, but he didn't let it stop him. "May I?" Izuku asked softly, and without opening her eyes, Uraraka nodded, trembling like a leaf, sensitive to the slightest touch. He took a moment to massage himself as he put on the condom, thinking that despite the overwhelming excitement he felt, he couldn't allow himself to finish too quickly. Unlike what had happened earlier in the shower, now he wanted to be with Uraraka in such a gentle and tender way that she would never want to leave his side again. He parted her legs gently, sliding into her while supporting part of his weight to reach her lips. Izuku tried to make his kisses, as well as his movements, reflect all the affection and devotion he had always felt for her. However, when, at one moment, Uraraka slightly opened her eyes to look at him, Izuku felt the sharp pain in his chest again, and he couldn't stop the small tears that welled up in his eyes as he realized why. The first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains of Uraraka's room, casting a soft glow over her tousled hair and sleepy eyes as they fluttered open. A faint sound of movement caught her attention, and as she turned in bed, she saw Izuku standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the knot of his tie. She couldn't help but smile. "You weren't planning on leaving without saying goodbye, were you?" Uraraka asked, her voice carrying the grogginess of someone just waking up but still tinged with her usual cheerfulness. Izuku turned at the sound of her voice, his green eyes softening as he took in the sleepy smile she gave him from the bed. He returned her smile briefly, though a shadow lingered in his gaze, betraying a mix of emotions. "Sorry. I didn't want to wake you, especially since you mentioned today was your day off." "Actually," Uraraka stretched on the bed like a cat, "even though it's my day off, I have some errands to run. So waking up early feels nice." Izuku lowered his head slightly. "But maybe we could see each other again this weekend," she said with a smile. "There's a new amusement park that just opened, and I'd really like to check it out. What do you think?" In contrast to Uraraka's cheerful demeanor, Izuku's expression remained serious. He placed a hand on his chin, then over his mouth, as if pondering something deeply, before turning away, leaving Uraraka with only his profile. Uraraka, about last night. Her heart stopped abruptly, and her hand gripped the sheets tightly, trying to steady the unease that suddenly gripped her. Last night was amazing, but Izuku's voice wavered briefly before he continued, but I don't think this is going to work. Uraraka's eyes, which had moments ago been alight with joy, began to fill with a different kind of shine, wet and trembling. But why not? She asked softly, her voice almost pleading for his attention. Yet, Izuku still wouldn't look at her. For years, we've gone down different paths, and I don't think it was right for us to step back into each other's lives like this. From the corner of his eye, Izuku saw Uraraka lower her head, but he restrained himself from turning to face her. I also think, he continued, our lives are moving at different paces, and that will eventually pull us apart again. And honestly, I don't know if I could handle that happening all over again. The silence that followed was so heavy they could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the living room. Neither of them moved, the words hung in the air like a knot that refused to unravel. When Izuku finally closed the door to Uraraka's apartment behind him, the resolve he had clung to crumbled. Tears spilled from his eyes, falling quickly and uncontrollably. His heart ached so sharply that he pressed his hand against his chest, as if that could somehow ease the pain. He knew he had done the right thing. That the best thing for her was to move on, to find someone who didn't carry so many shadows of doubt and could protect her the way she deserved. But knowing it didn't ease the sharp sting of loss, and in that moment, in the cold morning air, he felt more alone than ever. He had always loved her. And he always would. But he wanted her to live her life with someone better than him. A series of knocks on Izuku's door jolted him awake in his dorm room at UA, at just 18 years old. The temperature had dropped considerably, and he felt the chill as he inhaled more consciously, his nose sensitive to the cold. Opening his eyes, Izuku found traces of tears streaked down the sides of his face, and an uncomfortable weight lingered in his chest. When he spoke, his voice came out hoarse and slightly strained. Who is it? From the other side of the door, a clear and authoritative voice immediately responded, unmistakable in its intensity. Midoriya. It's me. I'm here to remind you that we agreed to meet in Class B's common room to celebrate this year's Christmas party together. I hope you haven't forgotten. We've all been waiting for you for several minutes to head out. Ida. Izuku quickly answered, blinking as he tried to wipe the tears from his face and sitting on the edge of the bed, of course. Sorry for worrying you. I'll be down in a minute. The silence that followed from the other side of the door felt unusually long, until Ida's voice came through again, this time with a softness uncharacteristic of him. Are you sure you're all right, Midoriya? Your voice, it doesn't sound like it usually does. Izuku held his breath for a moment, feeling the knot in his throat tighten. His mind raced, searching for an excuse to explain his state without raising suspicion. No, I'm fine. It's just that I was talking to my mom, and, you know how we are in my family, we end up crying a bit when saying goodbye during the holidays, he said, forcing a light laugh. The lie came out. Surprisingly naturally, though his heart pounded at the thought that Ida might catch on and press him further. There was a pause before Ida's reply came, this time with a more analytical tone. Oh. I see. Without a doubt, you and your mother have a special bond, one where you're not afraid to show your emotions openly. That's truly heartwarming. But don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Not everyone might understand. Why yeah, please, Izuku replied, feeling a twinge of guilt for lying to his friend and for how easily Ida had believed him. Just try not to take too long, Midoriya. We can't leave without you. Don't worry. I'll just grab my scarf and gloves, and I'll be there in no time. Understood. Ida replied before his footsteps faded down the hallway. Despite what he'd just assured his friend, Izuku remained seated on the edge of his bed for a few moments longer, his gaze fixed on the all-night calendar hanging on the wall. Outside, the cold winter breeze rustled the tree branches, causing the window to creak softly. He let out a deep sigh, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. For some reason, he couldn't bring himself to get up just yet. There was something in the atmosphere, a mix of loneliness and nostalgia, that seemed to have trapped him. Izuku walked through the UA courtyard, trying to appear more cheerful than he actually felt. Beside him, Kaken, Todoroki, and Ida kept him company, their voices weaving into a conversation that Izuku couldn't quite follow. Ida gestured passionately, as was his habit, while Todoroki nodded calmly. Bakugo scrolled through the news on his phone. Izuku, however, was distracted. Almost instinctively, his gaze drifted backward, where Tsuyu and Uraraka were walking together. Their laughter and the cheerful tone of their conversation reached him. Uraraka seemed especially radiant, her eyes sparkling as she nodded enthusiastically at something Tsuyu said. For a split second, Tsuyu seemed to notice where his attention had been, but Izuku quickly looked forward again, hiding his face behind his scarf and then focusing on the ground as they kept moving. "Is something wrong?" Todoroki's serious voice broke through his thoughts, his heterochromatic eyes studying Izuku with curiosity. "And no, nothing's wrong. Don't worry," Izuku answered quickly, trying not to draw more attention to himself. Ida stepped in immediately, raising a hand between them. "It's a personal matter that doesn't concern us. No further questions are necessary." But Todoroki didn't seem convinced. With a pensive expression, he added, "Do you know what's going on with him?" Before Ida could respond, Bakugo scoffed irritably. "The class rep already said it doesn't concern us. It's probably just his usual sentimental holiday nonsense. Nothing to worry about. If something actually serious happened to this guy, I'd be the first to know." Kaken Izuku looked at him, surprised by the statement. Bakugo, clearly uncomfortable, averted his gaze with a scowl. "I think I'd know," too, Todoroki said calmly, bringing a hand to his chin as if deep in thought. "Ha! That's hilarious." Bakugo snapped brusquely. "Your ability to read people hasn't improved one bit since I met you." "I believe it has," Todoroki countered, completely serious. "And I think I'm better at picking up on subtle hints now. I'll believe it when I see it." Before the argument could escalate, Tsuyu appeared beside them, her characteristic calm but direct tone cutting through. "Excuse me. Ida, Todoroki, and Bakugo, there's something I'd like to discuss with you in private," she said, bowing her head slightly. "Midoriya, would you mind giving us a moment?" "Ha. Oh, sure. I'll just." Izuku began to step back, ready to give them space, but Ida immediately stopped him, grabbing him firmly by the shoulder. "What is this about, Azui?" the class rep demanded, adjusting his glasses with a serious expression. "You know Midoriya is completely trustworthy, and any matter can be discussed in his presence. I don't think there's any need to exclude him. And I don't think I've got any business with you, frog face." Bakugo growled impatiently. Todoroki, surprisingly, pushed both of them forward by their backs. "Please, if Azui took the trouble to ask for a moment, it must be important," he said, gesturing slightly backward with his head. Finally, both Ida and Bakugo caught the hint. "Oh, yes. I remember now," Ida said, clearly faking. "Apologies. It'll only be a moment, Midoriya." "TCH, fine. But make it quick," Bakugo grumbled. Izuku remained on the path, watching as his friends moved ahead, and couldn't help but feel a little lonely. However, when he turned his head, looking for something to distract him, he stumbled upon a sight that instantly lifted his spirits. A few meters away, Uraraka stood quietly admiring the white flowers on a pale tree, her serenity captivating. Before he fully realized it, Izuku found himself walking toward her. "My mom loves winter flowers too," he said when he was almost beside her. "I think she likes them even more than cherry blossoms in spring. They're really appealing, aren't they?" Uraraka replied with a soft smile, glancing at him from the corner of her eye. Izuku didn't look at the flowers. He kept his gaze on her. "Yeah. They really are." They exchanged a brief but meaningful smile before continuing along the path, now walking side by side. By the way, have you guessed who you might have drawn for the gift exchange? Uraraka asked suddenly, picking up the conversation. I haven't thought much about it, actually, Izuku admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. Do you know? Even if I did, I don't think I should tell you, she teased, letting out a light laugh. Her cheeks turned a faint shade of pink as she mirrored his gesture, rubbing her own neck as if what she was about to admit made her a little shy. You know, I still have the little All Might you gave me during our first gift exchange. I lost it for a while, but luckily, I managed to get it back. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise, but before he could respond, he noticed Uraraka's gaze drift briefly toward the horizon, as if recalling something distant. I still have the bag of mochi you gave me back then, Izuku said, touching his chin thoughtfully. Uraraka immediately turned to look at him, surprised. You do? Of course, Izuku replied, his tone brighter now. It's where I keep the letters you sent me while I was abroad during the interviews 2 years ago. For a moment, Uraraka's surprise gave way to confusion. Letters? She asked, tilting her head. I don't remember sending you any letters. Izuku suddenly looked nervous and covered his mouth with one hand. What letters? Uraraka pressed, narrowing her eyes slightly. Ah. Well, the truth is it's nothing, forget about it. He blurted out, waving his hands defensively. Uraraka kept watching him, and he had to take a deep breath before he dared to tell the truth. It's just I've always been afraid something might happen to the cloud, because of someone's quirk, or some mistake, or something like that. And maybe I'm being too paranoid, Izuku started explaining, pulling his scarf tighter around him. That's why I decided to print some chats and emails from important people in my life, like they were letters. So I can always keep their words close, in case I ever need them. I guess I'm kind of weird for doing something like that. Immediately, Uraraka frowned and said with determination, You're not weird. Not weird at all. You're strong, brave, smart, sweet, considerate, and your hair looks awesome when the wind blows through it. They both stared at each other in silence for several seconds before sharing a soft laugh that made them blush, while the steam from their breath melted into an indirect kiss, rising into the sky. Izuku noticed this and looked up, just as the first snowflakes of the season began to fall. Uraraka, beside him, reacted similarly, also turning her gaze to the sky. Her face lit up with a mix of awe and serenity, as if the snow had brought with it a perfect moment of calm. However, when she looked away from the snow to look at him, she noticed a kind of contemplative smile on his face. Uraraka blinked, and for just a moment, she thought she saw Shigaraki as well. With a natural gesture, Uraraka's gloved hand reached for his. The initial touch was almost shy, but Izuku, feeling her, gently closed his fingers around hers. The light squeeze was full of tenderness, and his smile, though subtle, stayed the same. If something's bothering you, I recommend you stop bottling up your feelings, she said, a little worried, but with a kind of smile. That will only cause you pain later. Izuku turned his head toward her, surprised by her words. But then something changed. His eyes briefly shifted behind her, and for a fleeting moment, the shadow of Himiko Toga seemed to form in his mind, like a dark echo of past warnings. Before he could think too much about it, he hugged her. The movement was sudden, but not forced. Uraraka, though surprised at first, quickly relaxed and returned the embrace. Soon, her head rested softly on his shoulder. Now that I know, I promise I'll write to you whenever I can, she whispered, against Izuku's shoulder. Yeah, he replied just as softly, squeezing her hand a little tighter, the one they were still holding. The silence between them was comfortable, as if words weren't necessary in that moment. But Uraraka couldn't help but speak again. I still can't believe they chose my final project to start an educational reform. Izuku loosened his embrace a little to look at her, his green eyes closing when he smiled. I believe it. The snow kept falling around them, gently accumulating under their feet. Izuku closed his eyes for a moment, and in his mind, he returned to that day when Uraraka's words in her speech for the civilians had moved him so much that he had fallen to his knees, overwhelmed by the strength of his feelings. When he opened his eyes, he lifted their hands, still joined, to the level of their hearts, looking at them as if that gesture was enough to capture everything they felt for each other. Izuku had understood it back then. Their feelings, and how mutual they were, but neither of them had said anything. It didn't seem necessary, and maybe it was better this way, now that they would have to say goodbye for a while. They both separated a little, and though their cheeks flushed, they just smiled at each other familiarly. Hatsum was standing next to Bakugo, who remained with his back to the railing on the second floor of the Class B building, pretending to be indifferent. But eventually, he asked, "So, what do you think?" She chuckled a bit before answering. "It's really hard to watch. I think it was a good opportunity, and they completely wasted it. And honestly, I don't understand why. They look great together." Tch, Bakugo grumbled. Even if he won't admit it, that guy also has a huge ego and won't let things happen unless it's on his own terms. "You think so?" she asked with curiosity. "Because I don't see it that way. That kind of thing isn't really my area." Bakugo didn't answer and instead turned around to lean against the railing, facing the horizon that was starting to be covered in snow. "About what we were talking about earlier, how long do you think it'll take?" "I don't know. It's hard to say with something so elaborate," Hatsum replied with her characteristic smile. "Maybe the current technological advancements and materials will limit us for at least 5 years. "That's way too long," Bakugo complained, pulling away from the railing and turning his back on her, before glancing over his shoulder. "Maybe it would be better if you worked on a time machine instead, to fix a few things." Hatsum responded with a laugh as she followed him down the stairs from the second floor. "I warn you, never challenge a genius like me with something like that. Now, it's just going to be stuck in my head." Romantic IzuxOcha one-shots from the My Hero Academia Multiverse Dash. My Hero Academia, 2DxO. Night had fallen. Uravity, now 22 years old and still wearing her hero suit after a long day of work, hurried down the street, trying to reach Deku. "He's still not answering," she murmured with concern, lowering her phone and snapping it shut with a disappointed motion. "And I can't think of anywhere else he could be." Her eyes landed on Hatsum's workshop door. She hesitated for a moment, her fist raised in the air, ready to knock. However, a muffled sound from inside stopped her. Hatsum. What are you doing?" Izuku's nervous voice filtered weakly through the door. "Relax, Midoriya. You just have to trust me," Hatsum replied with a calmness that only heightened the tension in the air. After a brief silence, she added, "Or is it that you don't want to improve your skills to impress Uraraka?" I don't think this is the right way to do it," Izuku stammered, sounding more nervous than before. Uraraka's eyes widened, and her nails dug into the wooden door. Her heart raced at the words she had just heard, but curiosity held her in place. "What was that?" Izuku asked suddenly. "I think it came from the door. I'm only hearing the sound of your fear of success, Midoriya. I just don't get your attitude right now, and so suddenly. You've always been such a good boy, doing everything I asked," Hatsum exclaimed in her cheerful and persuasive tone. When there was no response, Hatsum pressed on. "Come on. Don't make me force you." Hatsum threatened more firmly. Her warning was followed by the sound of scuffling, accompanied by the clatter of tools and parts of some invention falling to the floor. Uraraka couldn't take it anymore. Imagining a scene of harassment or worse, she burst into the workshop. What she found was entirely different from what her mind had conjured. There was Izuku, clinging with both hands and feet to the frame of a metal door, while Hatsum maneuvered a robot armed with a plunger, unsuccessfully trying to push him inside. When both of them noticed her presence, they froze for a moment, as if someone had hit the pause button in the middle of the chaos. After a long explanation from Hatsum, Uraraka, still confused, repeated what she had just heard to make sure she had understood correctly. "So, This machine can increase a person's physical strength by modifying their DNA. Well, more or less. I have to admit, I'm impressed you managed to grasp part of the idea so quickly, even if it's a very simplified version, Hatsum responded, her tone a mix of enthusiasm and condescension. Though I suppose that's normal coming from someone who's still using that technological dinosaur, she added, pointing at the phone Uraraka was still holding in her hand. Uraraka squinted, holding back her annoyance. I don't think my summary was that bad, considering all the unnecessary jargon you used, she muttered to herself. Meanwhile, Izuku was busy examining a series of records on a tablet and didn't seem to have paid attention to what either of them had said. Uraraka didn't miss the fact that he was wearing a white lab coat and a pair of goggles matching Hatsum's. For a moment, they looked like a pair of inventors working together, and the thought irritated her more than she was willing to admit. Look at this! Izuku suddenly exclaimed, pointing at the tablet's screen and breaking her chain of thoughts. This risk percentage is insanely high. Hatsum, however, didn't even bother to look. There's always a margin for error in great inventions. If we stopped at every little inconvenience, we'd never move forward, she said nonchalantly. And this is the fastest way to unlock your full potential. Or is that not still your dream? To become the strongest hero. The inventor reached a hand toward Izuku's abdomen, as if she were about to convince him with a touch or maybe push him toward the machine, but Uraraka acted before she could. If he doesn't want to do it, you shouldn't force him. Uraraka intervened, stepping between them with her hands raised. I also think it's way too dangerous. Uraraka. Izuku murmured, surprised by her sudden intervention. Hatsum didn't back down. Now I see why Midoriya is acting like this. But I'm surprised, after everything I've done for him. Putting him at risk to test your inventions isn't something he should be thanking you for, Uraraka replied firmly. Izuku stepped forward, leaving the protective space she had created. I'm sorry, Uraraka, but, the truth is, I think Hatsum is a brilliant inventor. And she's always been careful with my safety, he said, looking at Hatsum with a glimmer of trust. But. See. That wasn't so hard, was it? Hatsum said triumphantly, placing a hand on Izuku's back and guiding him toward the machine. Uraraka opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. By the time she managed to gather the courage to stop them, it was already too late. Hatsum pulled a lever with a decisive motion, and the machine lit up with an intense green glow. White smoke began to rise from its base, filling the air with a mechanical hum. When the door opened again, the silhouette that emerged left both girls stunned. Standing before them wasn't just one Izuku but two. Well, of course, I knew there was a chance this might happen, but I guess, in the end, it wasn't a complete failure. You keep one, and I'll keep the other. Ha ha ha. Uraraka waved her hand dismissively, as if trying to brush away the memory of Hatsum's words after seeing the results of her experiment. Still, one last phrase lingered in her mind before fading entirely, but don't be so greedy, Uraraka. Yeah sure, she muttered irritably, taking a sip of her green tea while glancing toward Izuku's open room. Inside, one of him was lifting weights with his left hand while the other did the same with his right, seated face to face like a perfect reflection in a mirror. To her surprise, they seemed to get along quite well, as if this absurd situation was the most natural thing in the world. Despite her initial exasperation, Uraraka couldn't help but feel her mood lighten as she watched them interact with such synchronicity. Later, the three of them sat at the table, sharing a peaceful meal together. Deku, Uraraka called suddenly. Yes, they both answered in unison, their voices blending seamlessly. She couldn't stop the slight blush that crept up her cheeks, but she worked to maintain her composure. Have you two thought about what you want to do until Hatsum can fix this situation? The Deku on the left gestured for the one on the right to speak first. He nodded before responding calmly. The main issue we've considered is that if Hatsum can't merge our consciousnesses when we're fused back together, we might end up with incomplete information if we do things separately or in different locations. I see, Uraraka said, nodding as she thought it over. So it would be best if you stayed together all the time, right? This time, the other Deku gestured for the one on the left to reply. Although, we've also thought it'd be a shame not to use this opportunity to be more productive. There are several things I've been putting off, like visiting my mom or shopping for groceries, he explained while the other Deku nodded in agreement. Also, since I've always been in the habit of talking to myself, it doesn't seem too strange to us to catch up at the end of each day. That way, we could double our productivity and, in theory, have the same information. Uraraka clasped her hands together, impressed by how well they organized themselves even in such an unusual situation. That's a great solution. You never cease to amaze me, she said enthusiastically, showing her support. But then she seemed to recall something. Oh, right. Tomorrow is a holiday, so I could go with whoever's going to the store. I need to pick up some toiletries. I'll go, both Dekus said in unison before turning to look at each other, confused. Sorry, I didn't mean to. If you want to, the Deku on the right started hesitantly. No. If you'd like to go with Uraraka this time, I'll visit my mom, the other offered with a conciliatory tone. Really? Sure, no problem. Alright, but next time, you can go. That sounds fair. Uraraka smiled, both amused and touched by their willingness to cooperate. As surreal as the situation was, Izuku's characteristic warmth seemed to double with each version of him. Unbeknownst to her, both Dekus were gripping their knees tightly under the table, as if holding back something they dared not express. Uraraka shifted restlessly in bed, feeling how the sheets seemed to tangle around her body every time she tried to adjust. The room was bathed in shadows, and the vastness of the bed became more apparent, as if the solitude somehow amplified its size. Reaching out her hand toward the empty space where Deku used to sleep, she couldn't help but sigh. Then, as she opened her phone, she saw on the screen that it was already midnight. She still agreed with the Dekus that this arrangement was better. They were sleeping on the new, spacious sofa bed in the living room, while she was in her regular room. This way, they ensured a peaceful coexistence between the three of them. However, as she brought her hands to her face, trying to dispel the soft warmth lingering on her cheeks, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a mistake by letting things go too far that afternoon with one of them. She closed her eyes, but the fragments of what happened came back with startling clarity. It had all happened so suddenly. On their way back from the supermarket, they'd taken advantage of some store discounts, and with Bakugo's upcoming Halloween party around the corner, they couldn't resist buying costumes. Deku had chosen a medieval explorer outfit from a fantasy world, while she picked a sorceress alchemist dress that matched his. The idea of trying them on when they got home seemed fun until they stood face to face. The image of Deku in his outfit, which made him look bolder and more masculine, was etched in her mind, just as hers was in the mirror's reflection, in a dress that gave her the image of a sweet yet elegant character. They both blushed as they looked at each other, and before they knew it, the distance between them vanished in a kiss that grew more intense, until everything else faded into the background. She wanted to believe there was nothing wrong with it, after all, they were a couple and had been living together for a while. But the memory of the other Deku, the one who had spent the afternoon visiting his mother, left a trace of guilt in both of them. It was absurd, they knew, because technically they were the same person, but the feeling of having excluded one of them still unsettled them. Suddenly, a whisper broke the silence of the night. Uraraka tensed upon hearing two voices and immediately sat up, moving silently toward the door. She opened it just enough to see the living room lit by the faint moonlight, with the two Dekus lying on the sofa bed, speaking in hushed tones. Mom made us our favorite dish. And it seems she loved the flowers we decided to bring her, the Deku who had gone out that afternoon whispered. His tone was warm and cheerful. It looks like she doesn't need anything for now. I'm glad to hear that, replied the other Deku, lying on his side, watching him attentively. The first Deku closed his eyes with a peaceful smile. It was nice to visit her after such a long time, but tell me, how did things go for you guys? He asked softly. Did you find everything on the list? Did you manage to stay within budget? The Deku who had stayed home after shopping shifted uncomfortably, partially covering his face with the blanket. His behavior didn't go unnoticed, but his counterpart gave him time to respond. We found everything, and Uraraka showed me a way to save using the supermarket app, he replied quietly, avoiding eye contact. The other Deku smiled sincerely. That's great. It seems like she always knows those kinds of tricks to save. However, the silence that followed was too heavy. The Deku who had spoken first watched as his counterpart completely covered his face before whispering, almost inaudible. By the way, when we got home Uraraka and we touched each other a little. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck between them. The Deku who had been with his mother held his chin and then covered his mouth, trying to process the information and analyze how he felt about it. Oh, I see, he murmured at last, with some seriousness. Ah, really? Yeah, Uraraka felt a strange weight in her chest as she listened to the confession. From the crack in the door, she suddenly saw the closest Deku smile as he watched his counterpart still covered by the blankets. Sorry, whispered the Deku who had confessed. There's no need to apologize. We knew beforehand that this could happen, the other Deku replied, his tone light and reassuring. After all, you are me, and I am you. And I still trust that Hatsum will find a way to make us one again. Uraraka sighed softly along with the other Deku, releasing some of the weight of that guilt. I'm relieved you're taking it that way, said the Deku who had confessed, finally letting his face peek out from behind the blankets. Despite his words, his expression still reflected a twinge of guilt. Though I still feel a bit bad. I wish there was a way we could be the same again. Uraraka couldn't help but blush when she heard that, feeling the warmth spread across her cheeks. I think I understand why you feel that way, said his counterpart, mirroring the same blush, though he tried to hide it by covering his mouth and looking away. Maybe only if you want you could tell me what exactly happened. After all, we promised to share anything important from the day. And maybe Uraraka hopes we repeat some of what happened today. The Deku who had confessed thought for a moment before cautiously nodding. Okay, he agreed, though he still seemed uncertain. But only if you promise it won't bother you. I promise, assured the other, his smile radiating confidence. Uraraka, who had been listening from her hiding spot, held her breath as the voice of the Deku telling the story grew quieter. As she tried to get closer to hear more clearly, she noticed the other Deku beginning to visibly blush. So, it was like a sort of roleplay, murmured the Deku listening, trying to process what he was hearing. I never thought Uraraka would like to try something like that. It wasn't exactly that, clarified his counterpart nervously. It's not like we were playing characters from the medieval era or anything. The costumes were just the beginning, but then we forgot about them. I see, the other Deku turned his gaze away, his face burning with embarrassment. Though I admit, I feel a bit envious. You promised you wouldn't be upset. I'm not upset, I promise, he laughed softly. Then, with a hint of curiosity, he added, if you want you can keep telling me. The Deku recounting the experience hesitated for a moment, but eventually continued. Under the costume. Uraraka was wearing a black set. The other Deku blushed deeply again, bringing his hand to his mouth as if that could contain his reaction. Then I took off her BR and I caressed one of her melons with my left hand while I nipped at her neck from behind. As he spoke, his confidence grew, although his face remained bright red. Then I touched her in front, over her underwear, using W8, interrupted the other Deku abruptly, his face completely red. I don't think I can hear much more. Oh. They both fell silent for a few seconds, a sense of discomfort and something inexplicable lingering between them. Maybe we should try to sleep now, suggested the listening Deku, still avoiding direct eye contact. Yeah, maybe that's for the best, replied the other Deku, his tone slightly more neutral. Good night. Rest well. One of the Dekus turned to the left, while the other settled toward the right. But the stillness of the room failed to bring them rest, both remained awake, staring into the emptiness of the darkness, struggling with their disordered thoughts. Uraraka carefully closed the door to her hiding spot, making sure to make no noise. She tiptoed back to her bed, her face still as red as a tomato from what she had just heard. However, a strange warmth replaced her embarrassment as she curled up under the covers. For the first time that night, she felt like she might actually fall asleep. An hour passed, and the Dekus were still trapped in their own insomnia. Silently, the door to Uraraka's room opened again, letting out a soft creak. A pair of feet crossed the threshold, heading toward one side of the bed, followed by another identical pair moving in the opposite direction. Uraraka, still in light sleep, smiled softly when she felt the familiar warmth of two bodies on either side of her. When the arms of both Dekus wrapped around her, one on each side, a deep sense of peace enveloped her. The room fell silent, except for the rhythmic breathing of the three of them. A few days had passed, and the three of them were sitting around the living room table. Uraraka held her cell phone, which remained on speaker, allowing everyone to hear the voice on the other end of the line. Hatsume's voice rang out with her characteristic energy, loud and cheerful as always. "I assure you I've been researching the topic extensively." "I swear." Hatsume began, her overflowing energy coming through the phone. "But the truth is, I find it very risky to try and reunite you. Reversing this is too complicated. I'm sorry. But it looks like you'll have to learn to live with the three of you together." Hatsume's voice rose a little more, as if trying to soften the blow with her usual optimism. "But if you think about it and look at it from the bright side, it's not that bad, right? Well, I have to go now. I wish the three of you a good life. Bye." Her declaration was followed by the unmistakable monotone sound indicating that no one was on the other end of the line anymore. Uraraka remained frozen in place, her gaze lost on the phone in her hand. Meanwhile, the two Dekus, sitting across from her, exchanged a look that needed no words to express what they were both feeling. For the first time since their unusual separation, their eyes reflected a spark of tension that was far from friendly.